Hello, and welcome to everyone listening in. We will learn how to accept. As usual, we always like to mention that everything being discussed is based on logic and reason, and an extensive use of the notions of cause and effect. So if things are not clear, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to write to guide@personalmeditationguide.com. So in this third class, we will learn how to accept. Having learned what is anger and why we get angry, now we'll go deeper into the practice of patience and acceptance. So as was said, we should remember that we cannot control when hardships arise, and that there are many circumstances that bring us misery and suffering, completely out of our control. And while we create the causes for future suffering, the moments of happiness and joy are very limited. We have to understand that all the suffering we encounter is actually a result of our actions that we've performed in the past. Because if we don't experience this suffering, then who should? Now, what's important about this aspect, and this is where we get into the law of cause and effect, which will be explained in much more detail in later sessions. What's important to contemplate and to understand right now goes according to one of the old proverbs of what goes around comes around, meaning that the actions we've taken in the past, since everything is a matter of cause and effect, so if we are experiencing an effect, it implies that there must have been a cause. And if the effect is happening to us, it implies that we were an agent in that cause. Otherwise, it wouldn't come back to us. So as we were saying, this will be discussed in greater detail in a future session. So why this is important to understand and accept right now is because it brings us to learn to accept basically what is unavoidable to us, rather than try to fight against it. If all the causes and conditions are assembled for an effect to arise, then fighting against it, especially after the effect has already occurred, is pointless. So this is again in order to help us accept more willingly the hardships that comes our way. Because we understand that instead of fighting against what is happening, we work with it and we go with the flow to change, if we can, our other circumstances. But in either case, even if we cannot change them, then we remain peaceful in our mind. So if we learn to accept this unavoidable suffering, basically what's going to happen is that unhappy thoughts can never arise to really disturb us. Because if we're in a mind of acceptance, then we're more easily going with the flow with things. And therefore our mind is no longer disturbed by the hardships. Now we know that there's a lot of difficult circumstances that we cannot avoid. But there's one thing we can do. If we learn to control our mind and learn to accept, that we can avoid the unhappiness and the anger that these circumstances usually provoke in us. It is really based on our habitual way of reacting to these hardships, rather than the hardship itself that comes and disturbs our peace of mind. And this is where we have to start looking within ourselves to understand this properly. We have to stop believing that external circumstances and people, no matter how difficult they are the actual cause of our suffering. We have to start looking within and start looking at the way our mind behaves automatically. Basically, we have to start looking at our habits of mind and the way we react to things by default. For instance, and we could imagine that if we would change our default reaction to one of peace and acceptance, we could easily imagine that we won't have any problems. So this does not imply that our external circumstances are not difficult. It is implying only that we are at peace with them and we work with them, as opposed to fighting against something that cannot be undone from a perspective of past and present circumstances. We could work to change them going forward, but we're no longer trying to change the past. And that is the subtlety that is important to understand here. So when we learn to accept these difficult circumstances, and we accept them patiently, our real problem disappears. And what is meant by real problem is that it's the inner problem that disappears. And that's why it's the real problem. Because outer problems are outer problems. They're the problems of the circumstance and the situation. It's not our problem. Yes, we have to engage with them and move forward with them, but our inner peace and happiness will not be disturbed. For example, one of the common confusions that we might contend with every day is, let's say our computer breaks down when we have an important deadline. How would we normally react to a situation similar to that one? So there's something that we have to get done, and something breaks down that kind of delays or puts obstacles into accomplishing what we have to get done. Will we stay peaceful and do what we have to do to get it done? Or will stress arise in our mind, which comes from a mind that is not wanting to accept these situations? So in the case of the computer breaking down, what we fail to analyze is how there's really two things at play here. There's the computer being broken, and there is our desire for the computer not to be broken. So if we were to analyze each aspect of the situation, so the computer being broken and our desire for the computer not to be broken, which one would be the true cause of us feeling stress? If we analyze it honestly, we will see that it's the desire for the computer not to be broken, which is actually causing us harm. For the broken computer, well, that's the computer's problem. The computer has the problem of being broken. But if a mind is accepting of the computer being broken, our inner peace is not disturbed. Now, this does not go to say that we don't fix the computer. We don't take steps to resolve the problem, the outer problem. For instance, maybe the quickest solution would be to get another computer, or to borrow a computer, or we get it fixed right away if it can be fixed in time. So this does not contradict the aspect of fixing the computer. All we're saying is that we have to stop our uncontrolled desires, which are the true causes of our unhappiness and our suffering. And we could imagine that if that desire is gone, once again, we will stay at peace. And this could be said for a lot of other circumstances that occurs in our life. For instance, when our body becomes ill, how do we react again? Do we accept the pain? Do we accept the discomfort and see it as a way of practicing our patience and not creating more causes for developing these suffering thoughts in the future? So basically, we're reprogramming our mind to react differently, or are we just letting ourselves go in this disturbed mind that wishes for this pain and this discomfort to be gone? Because if we have no choice to live through it, to live through this pain and discomfort while our body heals itself, and if we start cursing and we start becoming angry at everything, and we let ourselves become depressed, so not only do we have the additional suffering of mental torment, but our physical pain is likely to increase as well. And we might have already certain experiences of that, where once we've accepted and let go of our desire for it not to be there, that the pain actually lessens, because we're just not paying attention to it anymore. So we don't even experience that pain so intensely. But the opposite is true as well. If we start focusing on the pain because we don't want the pain, our pain is likely to be increased in our mind because we're focusing on it. It becomes the only object within our mind, and therefore its intensity will grow. And now there's two problems. There's the problem of the pain, but we add an additional torment, which is the psychological torment of saying, I don't want this pain to exist, even though we don't have a choice in living through it. So we can see that responding to hardship with a non-acceptance and an anger will only make things worse. And by cultivating a mind of anger, only increases our problems for the future as well. Because by engaging in these negative actions, we actually create causes for future suffering. Because from a negative action, a negative cause, comes a negative effect. And from a positive cause comes a positive effect. And from a neutral cause comes a neutral effect. So basically, the effect is in relation to the nature of the cause. For instance, if we plant the seed of an apple tree, we get an apple tree. We won't get an orange tree. And we'll discuss this again in a later session, more detail, when it comes to cause and effect. So, in summary, we have to understand that anger really destroys our current peace of mind and happiness, and unfortunately, it robs us of our future happiness as well. And it ensures that we live a life of suffering because we're programming ourselves to react that way all the time. And we're encouraging these habits to always react from a state of mind of not wanting what just occurred. So of the opposite, we're training our mind to reject all the time. And you could see that we're creating momentum. There's inertia in our mind because the habit takes on a bigger part of our mind. So therefore, we could foresee, and this is one of the laws of cause and effect. And Newton has stated as well, and other philosophies have stated, object in motion tends to stay in motion. So this applies also for our mind. Our mind does not exist in a separate reality that is not affected by cause and effect. So therefore, if we keep acting out of the mind of anger, then this mind of anger has inertia, and it will keep perpetuating itself because we keep acting on it all the time, unless we bring in an opposing force. Otherwise, it will tend to stay in motion, the anger. It will tend to stay within our mind. So we could use different ways of analyzing our mind, and we'll see that habit perspective or from a cause and effect perspective, we come to understand that our mind keeps acting in a certain way if we never consciously come to stop it. And this is really important, and really feel it at our heart, from our gut, that it destroys our current peace of mind and happiness, and how it could rob us from our future happiness. Because we're keeping in motion our reactionary mind of anger, and therefore all future circumstances that do not go our way, we will automatically reject, and thus will automatically create the mind of anger, and thus we will act out of this anger, and therefore perpetuating our own suffering. So we could see that just from that perspective, there's many, many benefits from learning to be patient and to accept hardship and suffering. So not only does it help us maintain a peaceful mind in the case of these distressing circumstances, but it also helps us gain a clear view of how our suffering perpetuates. So there's a certain mental stability that we can gain by just recognizing that all our experiences of pain and discomfort is really the fault of us having engaged in negative states of minds and actions in the past. And it explains why we're reacting in a certain way in the present moment. So the reason why it gives us this mental stability is because we understand where they're coming from. And we understand that we have the choice to do something about it. We're no longer a victim of our external circumstances, but now we gain an understanding and a certain power from knowing this. And therefore, when new circumstances arise, this understanding will help us stay calm because we no longer want to suffer in the future. We no longer want to perpetuate this reactionary mind that robs us of our happiness. If we really get to this recognition from the bottom of our hearts, we will automatically create a wish to want to get out of it, to want to get out of this cycle of suffering. Because we react in an angry way, we react with rejection and anger, We're training our mind to do the same in the future, and then it restarts all the time. We're always back in the cycle because we never actively try to break it. And that's why this recognition of understanding this cycle and how our suffering keeps being perpetuated brings us peace of mind in itself and will automatically bring a wish for us to get out of it. And this wish is extremely important because without this wish, we won't have the motivation to actually try and do something at every moment, to actually try to oppose our anger, to actually try to let it go. But with a deep recognition that this is why we keep cycling in these circumstances, and our mind keeps reacting in this way, and we keep getting robbed of our peace of mind in the present and in the future, we will really want to get out of it. What's important is to have this feeling of disgust and saying, I'm really tired of reacting in a certain way. We want to think that way. We want to be able to feel that knowledge, to experience this pushback. And this is where we're rejecting rejection in our mind. And this is wisdom because it actually leads to peace of mind. We're saying, I do not want to reject anymore what is because it's out of my control. It has already occurred. And it only leads to me being unhappy right now, and it robs us from our future happiness because I'm just perpetuating this habitual mind. And what's important about developing patience is that it's a basis for us training our mind, because we will go through obstacles when we train our mind, just like training our body. And if we don't learn to accept these obstacles as they arise, we will soon give up our training. So therefore, it's important to understand and to have a basis of patience, because not only does it help us become happy in the present moment and helps us become happy in the future, but it also is a foundation for us to grow our mind even more, to develop our mind and to train our mind to higher and higher states. Because as long as we're in conflict, always thinking that things should be different than the way they are, and always blaming circumstances and other people for our problems and our unhappiness, we'll really never have a clear mind to see what is really binding us to our suffering. We won't have the distance in our mind to see it, because we will always have our minds glued to our external circumstances and no hindsight. Whereas patience and acceptance really allows us to have a clear mind and to really see our mental habits, to be honest with ourselves, and to really look within our mind and see those habits that are creating and perpetuating our suffering. And this is the only way we could actually come and undo them, where we can break them down and start breaking these bad habits of mind and start creating new ones. And we could come to understanding this benefit that patience and acceptance is really the foundation for us developing happiness in the future, and to grow other states of minds that create happiness. So patience is really a foundation here. Because what we normally try to do when we encounter these difficult circumstances, and even when we encounter these really unpleasant feelings in our mind, and what we usually try to do is we try to urgently escape them. We try to get rid of them as fast as possible. We never take the time to really find out where these feelings are coming from. All we're always trying to do is change our circumstances, and we put so much energy in there, but yet we never take the time to discover those feelings and say, where are they coming from? What is the root causal state of mind that is bringing about these unpleasant feelings, which is then creating my unhappiness? We never take that time and space to do that. So for example, let's say we've helped someone and they didn't say thank you. They were completely ungrateful for it. Or maybe our partner fails to return any type of affection to us. Or maybe our boss, or we have colleagues that undermine us and they put us down. So these things hurt. And what we usually try to do is we try to escape these painful feelings. And we usually try to do this by becoming defensive. And then we start blaming the other person. And maybe we want to attack back. We start attacking. Or maybe we just turn in on ourselves and become very cold-hearted and completely despondent. We shut off. And unfortunately, by reacting so quickly, we actually don't give ourselves the time to know what's going on in our mind. We're already on the next part. And this is automatically coming from our anger, because we want to harm our external circumstance. We want to change it as fast as possible. And so therefore, we never take the time to look within our own mind and look at the feelings and look at, like we were saying, this root causal states of minds that bring about these feelings, these unpleasant feelings. Because in reality, if we just look at our feelings, they're not that intolerable. We could just look at them. Remember, they're just feelings. But we sometimes believe that we are our feelings. But if we really look at our feelings, they're things that come and go. So we cannot be our feelings, because otherwise we'd come and go with our feelings. But yet that's not what we experience. But we want to believe that we are our feelings. The meditation at the beginning with regards to the sky and the clouds comes to bring us this recognition that these feelings are just like clouds. They come and they go. But yet our mind is much more vast and unobstructed, just like a clear blue sky. So these feelings, we could come to see them as these clouds, and sometimes they're just bigger, like a big storm in the sky. But when the storm ends, what's left? Our clear mind. And these painful feelings will just dissolve, but our mind will remain peaceful. So just as there's room in the sky for a storm, there's room in this clear space of our mind for these hurtful feelings. And we understand from the beginning meditation on the mind that clouds don't have the power to destroy the sky. So therefore, these feelings don't have the power to destroy our mind. And this is important to contemplate so that we stop feeling that they do. We stop feeling that everything's going to implode, everything's just going to combust because of our feelings. Like we're going to just disappear. Like it's the end of the world. As opposed to just passing clouds. And therefore this helps us to not panic when we feel these storm clouds arising. Because if we accept the way our feelings arise and we accept to see these feelings in our mind, we'll have better power to investigate their nature and know where they're coming from. Because if we don't know where they're coming from, what we're actually rejecting behind them, then we have no way of actually removing this hurtful feeling in our mind. Because we fail to realize what we're rejecting. That wish that is saying, I don't want this to be. But what is it that we don't want to be? And sometimes they could be subtle and very difficult to understand, to see up front. But if we take a step back and we start analyzing properly all the circumstances and all the feelings that are arising in our mind, we will be able to do that. So this training in meditation will increase this ability. It will increase our ability to take a step back, to accept these feelings that are occurring in our mind, and to actually analyze them and do a root cause analysis to understand the root causal mind. And in this case, the rejection part. What are we rejecting per se that is causing this mind? And sometimes there could be many. So even if we've uncovered one and we've removed it, but we still keep feeling angry, we still keep hitting these unpleasant feelings, then it's time to just continue analyzing and maybe finding out that there are more things that we're not accepting. So when it comes to these external circumstances, we just have to understand them that they're triggers. They're not the substantial cause for the hurtful feelings. For instance, a seed is the substantial cause for the sprout. But the rain and the sunshine and the earth and the nutrients in the earth, they're conditions and triggers to help the seed sprout. And this works as well to analyze the mind, the way our mind works. The seed of anger is our wish that things would be other than what they are. And this is sprouting anger in our mind. Whereas the external circumstances are triggers. And why this is important is because we understand the dynamic between a trigger and a substantial cause. Because if we keep the seed in our mind, we always keep the potential for anger to arise, because all we need is those triggers and those conditions. Because if we keep the seed planted, and then all of a sudden conditions arise, the sprout will arise as well. What we're trying to do here is remove the root cause, remove the substantial cause. Because if there's no seed to begin with, no trigger can make a sprout. And this is the important part to understand with regards to our mind. So by patiently accepting these painful feelings in our mind, and by analyzing them and finding their root causal state of mind, we're basically removing the seeds from our mind. We're purifying our mind because we're uprooting these habitual ways of thinking. And therefore, if we uproot habitual ways of thinking, we no longer have the seed for anger to arise in the future. So this is another important aspect. And this is all, again, based on the understanding of cause and effect. Now, there's another aspect that comes into play, which is a bit deeper. It has to do with our ego, with our sense of self. And the English language and other languages are formulated in a way that identifies ourself with our feelings. And this is a major issue because it perpetuates our belief that we are our feelings, that we hold on to this sense of me that is a certain way, that has certain qualities and that cannot be changed. So it brings us to believe that there's this inherent me that has these qualities and characteristics that cannot be changed. And for instance, when we say words such as, I am feeling bad. So basically, I am. That type of wording is expressing the fact that there is a badness to the I. Just as we could say, I am human, I am Homo sapien, or whatever you want to call it in the family tree of animals, for instance. But we're using the same terminology to talk about feelings. I am bad. And it kind of brings us in to believe that I have this quality, that there's no other way of being. And this is tied into our idea of self. And the stronger we think that our ideas of self are inherent, that we have this inherent self with predestined characteristics and personality traits that cannot be undone, the less we're likely to step back from them and be willing to change them, because we're identifying ourselves with a flawed sense of self. We're creating an image of ourselves that is limited. And therefore, we never let ourselves let go of this identity that we've created and start cultivating an identity that is built on potentials instead. So if we learn to let go of this hardness to our sense of self, to start seeing our sense of self as much more fluid, as really just an idea that we make of ourselves, and that there's nothing more to that other than it's just an idea, the easier it will be for us to let go of these unpleasant feelings. For instance, just a change in language might help us do this. So there's a difference between saying, I am feeling bad, or I am sick, or I am not good, or I am sad. We could change it to, my mind is being afflicted by sadness, or there's an unpleasant feeling in my mind. Or, for instance, when it comes to the body, my body is sick, as opposed to, I am sick. And this creates a distance with these feelings, because we're changing the way we perceive them. We're changing the way we relate to them. And the way we word things have an impact because of the way we come to understand the relationship with that thing. And our words convey the way we think about that thing, the way we relate to it. Unless we already know how to relate to it, and we're using these words and these terminologies from a contraction of language. So it just becomes a contraction of language, yet in our mind we understand the way we relate to these things, it's okay. But if we do not have that distance in our mind and that change in relationship we have with these unpleasant feelings, with these sicknesses and so on, we need to maybe change the language we use to force us to change the way we relate to things. So by really becoming more distant towards these unpleasant feelings, they become less frightening, they become less intense, they become easier to deal with, they become easier to let go of as well. So this all comes with the way we relate to these feelings. And we shouldn't get discouraged by the difficulty in practicing patience. We have to become patient at practicing patience. And in this world, we see so many examples of people going through so much hardship, such as athletes, entrepreneurs. They go through so much physical punishment for the sake of their job. And they voluntarily endure all this hardship merely to earn money or to have a better reputation. So think about it now to be happy. Wouldn't we want to try, and that no matter the hardship, we will push on? If the outcome of practicing patience is happiness, isn't it worthwhile pushing through? Isn't it worthwhile engaging into the practice of patience if the outcome and the result of it is happiness? Because isn't that what we all want? To be free from suffering and happy all the time? Yet we don't want to go through any hardship whatsoever with regards to training our mind that actually has the potential to creating happiness. And this comes from an understanding, a logical and reasonable understanding of how our mind works, of how these feelings work, so that it's no longer blind faith. It's this confidence based on contemplation of logic and reason. So by familiarizing ourselves with the mind of patience, by training in the mind of patience, we become more apt at engaging in it in our daily lives and with regards to any hardships that comes our way. So it's only through familiarity that we'll be able to develop this. And familiarity just means that we're creating a new habit, because we become so familiar with practicing patience that it becomes our new default reaction. So we could use our daily experiences of hardships to familiarize ourselves with patience. So we practice on the small stuff so that when we're faced to a greater hardship, to a greater difficulty, to these greater feelings of unpleasantness in our mind, we will know how to deal with them constructively. We will know how to engage in them with patience and to be able to let go of this rejection and let go of our anger, and therefore cultivate a mind of patience in the greatest of difficulties. And why this is important, and we'll be talking about it in a future session, is that we will be able to handle the hardships that are inevitable in our life, such as old age, such as sickness and even death, and everything in between, from being criticized to having a bad reputation to being hurt. All these things that fall in between, we will have the ability to stay calm in the face of those adversities. And in this way, we'll actually learn to live without fear. Because we know that there's nothing that could happen to us that we can't accept and use to train our mind. And we could see that someone who has developed a very deep sense of patience is someone we want to be around with, is someone we can trust, is someone who can handle any situation. And these are the characteristics of someone who's great. Someone who gets angry and who falls victim to their own delusions is someone who's being defeated by their habitual delusions, to their habitual bad habits of mind. This is not strength. And we have to come and recognize this so that it motivates us and it inspires us to become an infinitely patient person. To become someone who has infinite patience. These are the greatest of people. So we have to learn to start exerting effort into getting rid of these inner problems, these inner enemies. We really have to put an opposing force. Otherwise, these bad habitual patterns of mind will not automatically and magically reduce. They will just keep us locked into these vicious cycles of suffering. And a cycle cannot be broken unless we exert power against them, unless we do something different. And this is where we need to contemplate over and over again to develop this motivation. This is how we develop patience. We have to remember the benefits, and we have to remember the faults of anger and the benefits of patience. And we have to learn that we have control over our mind if we wish to. So, for all intents and purposes, these external hardships could be seen as opportunities. So instead of having a negative experience through these hardships, we could actually use them, reflect on our own suffering, develop these insights, and develop these positive states of minds, and practice to have a training ground to practice patience and develop it. So by recognizing our vulnerabilities, by recognizing our faults, is the only way to dispel this arrogance and this pride, believing that we are better, we are the best. And if we go further, we could actually learn from looking at others as well, to go into their shoes and learn to try to live through empathy, those feelings, and to try to find patience and wish it upon those living beings so that they too can find inner peace and happiness. In this way, what's naturally going to arise in us is compassion, the wish for them to be free from suffering, understanding that the first step they need to do is change the way they see things. That's how they can be relieved of their suffering. And you wish it upon them. You wish, and this wish will come from looking at others and having patience and acceptance. Compassion will naturally arise from this state of mind. And this is also a state of mind that creates and perpetuates peace of mind and happiness. And this is only by recognizing our own suffering and the suffering of others.